committee meeting with the members of the Board of Trustees of Laketown Township and the Planning Commission of Laketown Township. Just to do a refresh, these joint meetings are fact-finding meetings where we're trying to make sure that the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission all hear pretty much everybody's public comment, receive all of the written correspondence, because over the next few months, the Planning Commission is first going to take up this issue, and then the Board of Trustees will have to review whatever the Planning Commission recommends. So after this meeting, it will be on the agenda of the Planning Commission to review the current Laketown ordinances and to work with the township attorney to make any proposed changes to the short-term rental ordinances, the zoning context and the licensing context. So we can discuss how that joint process will go forward, with first the Planning Commission doing its review, and then the Board of Trustees doing its review thereafter. On the agenda for today, there's one thing that is going to not happen, which is review of all the other local ordinances. There is a massive chart that I have put together that I'm trying to go through each local jurisdiction and address whether or not that regulation exists in Saugatuck Township, Fillmore Township, Park Township, Grand Haven Township, South Haven Township, from South Haven to Grand Haven, all along the lake shore, how our neighbors address short-term rentals. But I'm not done with it yet. It's taken me a lot of hours, but I'm hoping to have it done by the end of this week, and then we'll publish it online along with copies of all the ordinances, and we will send it to you all by email. The point of looking at all the other ordinances is to give you some ideas about how we might approach regulation of short-term rentals. So that's not happening at this meeting. The first item of business we have is to review and approve the minutes from the meeting on October 1st. I think you've all had a copy of this for almost a month. Does anybody have a motion, or does anybody? I'll move that we approve the minutes of the special meeting on October 1st.
I'll second.
Motion by Supervisor Ringelberg, seconded by Trustee Kuman, to approve the minutes of the special joint meeting from October 1st. I just want to call out to everybody that when I worked on these minutes with Mr. Jim Hayden, we tried to put a lot of detail in there about the questions that Attorney Bulci answered, so that you would have an easy way to refer back to what his legal advice was to this group of people. It'd be great if you could all just make sure that that's what you remember him saying. Did you get a copy of this, Ron? Could you pass down my copy to? Let's give Mr. Bulci a minute to see how he's quoted and make sure we didn't misquote him.
Say that since it wasn't the last time I did listen to the audio, about 95% of it was really good, and you could hear everything really well. So if we need to go back to that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Chad.
As long as everybody's spoken to the microphone, which I'm not doing right now. Yeah.
Was I screwing up?
No, you're great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'd say great.
Patrick had a lot of questions.
Spelled my name right. Looks good.
We got the little things right. All right, we have a motion that's been seconded to approve the minutes from the September or the October 1st joint meeting. Is there any further comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Great. I think it would be really good if we could introduce everybody here. So if we start with Township Manager Fox.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. Nice to meet everybody.
Michelle Saul,
What's your job?
Bowden, that's zoning, building.
Mark Timmerman, trustee.
Chad Nienhuis, Planning Commission Chair.
Stephen Engelberg, Supervisor.
Jake Ravens, Planning Commission.
Jim Johnson, Treasurer.
Pat Dietrich, Planning Commission.
Mike Kuman, Trustee.
Ron Bolsey, Township Attorney.
Except. Now we're going to be open for public comment. First, some of you may have noticed these big white notebooks. If you wrote to us about short-term rentals, your letter is in that notebook, and everybody on this joint board has received a copy of the notebook, right? That if people continue to write in, we're going to continue to add to that notebook. But public comment is the purpose of these meetings. We want to hear what people think and what they like about short-term rentals, what they don't like about short-term rentals. We want to hear from everybody that we can. So we've received a number of new letters. We're not going to read all of these, but all of these public comments are available on the Laketown website as well. And now we can have the public come and speak. If you identify yourself. I have
Lynn
a very
Covis.
tough cookie here. He enforces the 3-minute limit.
Oh, no worries. I talk fast. 4057 66th Street. I haven't said much because I don't kind of have a dog in the fight, so to speak. But what I realize your issues are, is you need some teeth. You need enforcement. That is your issue here, and that is what we're lacking. And you're either going to have to do that through fines or fees or both. And one thing that has come up through some of the people that I know is some of these properties aren't even following the zoning rules for occupation of houses, how many people can be in there for the particular zoning. And there has to be, I think that some of these fees, whatever, have to be specific to the properties and where they are. I think you have to be aware of what the zoning is and make sure that they are adhering to occupancy that everybody else has to follow. So my big deal is I think you guys need teeth.
Thank you.
Tim Woodham's 6668 42nd Avenue. Actually, I do have a dog in the fight, so to speak. I do own 2 properties, but I do, the items in the ordinance do need to be addressed. For me, my personal opinion after listening to, after listening to everything over the last few weeks are, you clearly need enforcement of the non-licensed units. It seems that a lot of problems that I hear about or I've heard about seem to maybe emanate from some of those. I do agree that in the single family zones, these properties need to be used by your definition of a single family. I think your ordinance originally was 16 people as an occupancy, clearly encouraged multifamily use, multiple families using these properties. I have a lot of kids and I can't get to 16 even with grandparents. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And lastly, the enforcement and ticketing. I don't disagree with that. If you've got a problem property, ticket the ticket the landlord or the owner. They can work it out with their tenant. And I think that's entirely reasonable. And as long as the owner doesn't have the intent of violating the ordinance, I would hope that you don't have a strike rule or anything like that that would preclude further rental. Because like for us, for instance, we don't have the intent of, having big parties and multiple families, but you never know who's going to show up. So we only have 2-bedroom houses, so I don't have that problem, but it's something to consider. And lastly, and I don't know why this bothers me so much, but on your website, when you guys notice these meetings, you have a paragraph in there that says, unlike other types of short-term rentals, where the owner lives on the property and complaints from neighbors about noise or disruptive behavior are almost non-existent, the owners of freestanding short-term rentals do not live on site. I don't know how that's relevant. And then it further goes on to say some owners of such property do not even live in the township. So what? What does that have to do with, what we're talking about here today? That just seems somebody's opinion who wrote this. And I don't think it should be,
I wrote it.
I'm sorry. But I just don't feel like it should be a part of the conversation at this point where people live.
Is there anything in that statement that is not true?
The underlying,
No, in the statement, is
no,
there anything in
the
there?
words are, there's nothing in the words, Supervisor, that are not true. It's the intonation of the words. Is that the right, am I using the right word there?
I get your drift. You
Yeah,
did.
that's all. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, have a great day.
You're a good neighbor, Tim.
Know who you're from.
Good to have a sense of humor. Anybody who wants to speak can come on up. It's nice to have such a good turnout on a dark and dreary Wednesday night in November.
Dale Harrison, 3108 62nd Street, Sagatuck Township. Greetings to the board and the planning commission. Having been on the planning commission and board of appeals in Sagatuck Township, I appreciate the work you do. I want to talk about a couple of things that about short-term rentals. First of all, single-family residences are the domicile. That's where we live. That's where we come back to when we're out of town. That's where people know us for long-term. Short-term rentals are nothing more than really a mini motel without a manager. Can you imagine? And they're in a residential area. Well, unfortunately, it's predictable that they're going to act out once in a while, and they're going to park on your yard. They're going to park on the street. They're going to create some noise. So the only way that I see to really resolve this to the satisfaction of people that live in the community that have for maybe 30 or 40 or 50 years or 10 years to protect their rights to their use and enjoyment of their property is to ban them in the residential areas, period. It solves a lot of issues. You can set aside a commercial area where they can construct these units and do the mini motel thing and make them nice and attractive. Generally speaking, they're really, when it comes, let me just move over to the school system. Sagatuck's got a wonderful school system. I had 3 kids went there. They ended up doing well in college. But they're getting hit by this because if you have 200 units, for example, and half of those would be a family with a couple of kids, that's $8,000 per kid per year that the school is not getting. If you have 200 units, the number for Sagatuck Township would be in Laketown, if they're both involved, 200 units in both communities, it'd be over $8 million a year that they're not getting, that they need for their building fund. As you may know,
You talk about the state revenue, which is based on head count. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. We're open for comments. Anybody else want to come up?
Good afternoon. My name is Jake Vanderplug. I live at 6507 Maple Lane, and the next door property to me, 6513 Maple Lane, is a short-term rental. It has been operating for about 9 months. I have friends who own short-term rentals. I've stayed at their properties. I used to live next door to a short-term rental before I moved into Laketown Township. And I have friends who are property managers who have short-term rentals as part of their portfolio. And a year ago, I had no problems with short-term rentals. Today, that's a starkly different comment. And the reason is because certain people operate certain types of short-term rentals. I have no doubt that there are short-term rentals that have operated for decades, if not more, in Laketown Township without incident. And I think that's not a problem. However, as our neighbor here brought up, the property owners don't have any control of the property. They don't know who's going to show up and they don't know what they're going to do. That's a problem. Every time the noise gets out of hand, I used to contact the property owners and express my concern. And I was given a response of, you're overreacting, you're hypersensitive, it's not any louder than a vacuum cleaner. There are people that live over 500 feet away from the short-term rental that have written letters to Laketown Township complaining about the noise from this property. That is not equivalent to a vacuum cleaner. So figure out how to get rid of the short-term rental properties that are problematic or get rid of them.
Thank you, Jake. Anyone else? If there's anyone online who'd like to speak, you can unmute yourself, or if you get stuck on that, you can just turn your camera on and wave at us and we'll try to help you. Mr. DeWitt, you're first up.
Thank you. Who then, just as a point of clarification, who is going to be deciding what the township will be doing? I'm assuming, is it everybody sitting at that table there?
So the way zoning ordinances in Laketown Township have typically been modified is for the Planning Commission to start with its review and then to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. And then the Board of Trustees can either adopt or modify or send it back to the Planning Commission. We have two types of ordinances about short-term rentals. They're referred to as permitted uses in the zoning code, subject to licensing requirements that are outside the zoning code.
Mm-hmm.
So for those ordinances that pertain to the licensing of the short-term rentals, the Board of Trustees could simply take that up on its own. But I think what we're looking for is for the for the Planning Commission to do its review and its recommendations to the Board of Trustees, and then for the Board of Trustees to take it up. So two different groups will vote on it, the Planning Commission as the Planning Commission, and then the Board of Trustees. But that is all the people that are sitting on this program today, but it's two different meetings.
So it really does just boil down to the Board of Trustees.
I think the Board of Trustees gives some deference to the Planning Commission.
All right.
So.
Okay. I think I'd just like to back up that it's like every law we all know. I mean, most of us are law-abiding people, but the reason why the laws are there are because there are just a few people that aren't. And I've always felt that was unfortunate. And I think that in a situation like this, there's got to be a way of being able to not make all people who are doing short-term rentals suffer, or not be able to do that because just a few people are a problem. I don't know how that's done. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that as a point of view. I also think at the very first meeting, you pointed out that whatever comes out of this all of this, those that have had approval already, whether it be because of grandfathered such situations or people that already had the rental license approved before the moratorium, those would remain as they are. Is that correct?
So what it is when people talk about banning freestanding short-term rentals, there is a class of freestanding short-term rentals that are currently legal under the zoning code and would be grandfathered going forward. Now, we can change the licensing scheme and increase the licensing requirements, but we can't forbid someone who's grandfathered from using their home as a short-term rental. So there are two types of ones that are grandfathered. One, we didn't get our first zoning code until 1945, and anybody who was doing short-term rentals before 1945, that would typically be in Maketaw, Castle Park, and Gosh Run Lake area, which have had short-term rentals for a long, long time. They would be grandfathered. And then anybody who's been licensed to do it since the board adopted the current short-term rental ordinance in 2020. So in between, I think it was February of 2020 and today, if you have a short-term rental license, you would be grandfathered. That doesn't mean we can't change the licensing requirements and the requirements for operation, but we can't remove your right to do that freestanding short-term rental. The current moratorium does not apply to accessory dwelling units, either attached or detached, that are used as short-term rentals. So we haven't had much of a conversation about those. Does that make sense, George?
It sounds muddy to me, but I don't know that I'm going to get much more out of it, so I will leave it at that. It does sound like the board is holding an awful lot of power over this. Even like when the very first meeting, you said without question, there will be no change if someone that either has already got a license for this or has a grandfathered setup, that will not change for anybody. Is that yes or no? Is that the case?
A zoning perspective, that's a yes.
All right.
The licensing requirements could change on an annual basis. They always could have. You know,
Okay, so what, can you give me an example of what that means?
So we don't specify any particular quiet times. We could change the licensing requirements to require that if you have a short-term rental, you know, they can't make noise outside after a certain hour.
And who would determine how much noise that would be? See, it's those sort of things that worry me.
Yeah, I get it.
Worries us too.
Yeah. You mean it worries you because you're afraid that it might be too much noise?
George,
Yeah.
over your 3 minutes, but
All right.
appreciate
I've said what I needed to say.
Yep. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Someone else is unmuted on Zoom. Can we get my whole neighborhood to call in? Everybody.
Just a point of clarification. Even though, and this is maybe a question. If you're operating a short-term rental, you should be licensed.
You should be licensed, even
Correct.
if you're grandfathered.
Even if you're grandfathered in, you still have to operate with a license.
Yes.
And that opportunity to get a license was from 2020 until we put the moratorium on the single family units, non-owner occupied units in the area. So just so that's clear to everybody.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Thank you, Chad.
So you mentioned even if you didn't have a license, your grandfathered, is that is no?
They needed to get a license.
They needed to get a
Correct.
license in 2020
Yep.
when we invoked the licensing requirement.
Okay.
Part of the zoning.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right, Ron?
It is, say someone was grandfathered from the zoning prior to us enacting the license requirements, and say they failed to get the license. They wouldn't lose the zoning grandfather by that failure, but they would be in violation of the licensing ordinance.
To have gotten a license.
Yep.
Anybody else online? Going once, going twice? Gone. We have people in the room who'd like to continue, so we'll. Public
Finish my
comment.
3 minutes with a quick question. Did we ever figure out how many licensed and non-licensed units were in the township? And I may have missed that at a prior,
So
roughly, I mean.
we have over 100 licensed, and we have just under 100 that I found online.
So it's about 50-50, give or take. Okay.
So, Mr. DeWitt's comment is very salient. That's the thing. So we've only been giving out permits since 2020 until now. So obviously, these people who are legally licensed are some of the problem. And that is the issue I think that people are concerned about, is it's like if they're automatically grandfathered in and we can't in any way enforce some rules, it's a problem.
We can tighten the rules, we can tighten the requirements, and we can do some enforcement if we have the money.
Right.
So that's what we need to address.
Okay. And so with the new licensing, there can be a new fee structure.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Dietrich.
Ron, could you briefly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't want to come up and speak tonight because I've spoken a lot, but I just have a question. And I think it's good for everybody here to know the clarification. It came up in the discussion, and my question is, are you sure that people who already have short-term rentals licensed can keep them no matter what, unless they violate some rules? Because I thought there were government entities that have banned short-term rentals altogether or else in certain areas. I don't know the answer to that question, but given the nature of the discussion, I think it's worth looking at. So that's my question. If
So I'll
what
give you an
have said-
example. I'll
I'm
give you an
sorry.
example.
Yes.
Short-term rentals in Park Township have never been a permitted use. They are now enforcing their ordinance against everybody unless before the Park Township Zoning Act was adopted in 1955, you had a short-term rental. So they have a licensing regime that's just for the grandfathered properties, most of which are along Lake Michigan and Lake Macataw, that they can prove, the owner can prove they had a short-term rental there before 1955. So they're banned in Park Township except where they're grandfathered.
Do you know whether they are banned in Holland? I had read that short-term rentals are banned in Holland. I could be wrong, but that's what I read.
There are short-term rentals in certain districts in Holland.
How about Dexter, Michigan? Because I read that.
You can say, you can make those decisions. You can ban them in a district. That'd be a statement that would be accurate. They are banned in a certain district, but that ban doesn't take away grandfather rights. And though the grandfather rights are not in an ordinance, they're in the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. If something was legal when it was initially started under the zoning, or if there wasn't any zoning, so it was legal because of a lack of zoning, it does not lose its zoning protected status by virtue of a subsequent zoning ordinance.
Okay, I have learned over the years to not trust everything that you read in a newspaper, so.
You can trust me.
In Ron, we trust.
I would love to think that, Ron, I really would, but I want to
After all
trust,
this time, you don't?
I want to trust but verify,
Verify.
let's put it that way.
That's good.
Ronald Reagan, famous.
Dale Harrison. So what are you gonna do? So some communities, they do this. You have 3 violations in 3 years, you lose your license. It's suspended. It's not complicated. Police report, an official goes out and verifies there's been a problem, they're parking on your lawn, you got a trespass for action, you get a ticket from the county sheriff's department for them. So you can regulate them if they don't conform to the standards you want in your community. So one way to do it would be to give them a 2-year license. If they have 3 violations, their right to have the short-term rental is suspended for 2 years or 5 years or however long you want to make it. You can't make it easy for these folks. I mean, they're really, when I talked about $8 million a year for the schools, that's just the tip of the bucket. It's going to get worse. So the houses that could go to families, could go to people that want to work in our communities. Then talk about the loss of value of my property because I can't enjoy it and use it like I used to before the short-term rental event. That opens up the township and the community to, and so I do know that there is a class action lawsuit against a community in Missouri where property owners in the community that have lived there a long time tried to enjoin the planning commission of the township from moving forward because their loss of value, their substantive loss of value and enjoyment of their property was taken away by the short-term rental investor. So there's a lot of things you can do to control it, and I'll be glad to sit down and talk more with anybody that's interested at any time, pretty much.
Thank you. Why don't we close public comment? And we can go to a discussion on the board. I've not seen anyone else wanting to make a public comment. I will close the public comments section. So Patrick, you have a.
Could we ask Ron, could you explain, assuming for the sake of discussion, that we have an enforcement, that we have ordinances in place, we have new rules or modified rules, and then we have an enforcement mechanism. Could you describe what the legal actions we have, the leverage we have for both, for a violation of, say, a noise or capacity issue, and then say an unlicensed STR? In other words, what would the steps be, and how much leverage do we have over those two situations?
Well, if we have an ordinance violation, whether zoning or regulatory police power, we have the ability to cite. Zoning ordinance is a civil infraction.
Everything's a civil infraction.
Everything is a civil infraction. So we would go to a hearing in front of a magistrate. The nice thing with a civil infraction is we have a lower burden of proof. It's beyond, it's more likely than not, as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt, as is necessary with a misdemeanor criminal infraction. We can also ask for affirmative relief with a civil infraction. So we ask the court not only to find them responsible for the violation, we also can ask the court to issue an affirmative order that they must fix the problem, well as pay for the past violation. We can, and in fact, I dealt with one today at one of my local units. We can suspend licenses and eventually potentially even terminate a license if we have repeat violations. Those are just things, details we'd have to write into the ordinance about what the remedies would be.
But if they say we fine them $1,000 and they say, no biggie, that's 2 nights. And they say, I'll be glad to pay. And what if we say, we're gonna take away your license and they say, go ahead, I'm still renting?
Well, then we'd go to court and ask for an injunction and an affirmative relief, and either we get enforcement with the courts or we don't. I would think if we have someone thumbing their nose at our ordinance, as long as our ordinance is valid, we're going to get a court to enforce them.
How do they enforce? Have you ever been part of an action where someone actually defied the order, or defied the township, whatever, and it really came to, poor choice of words, it came to blows?
Well, ultimately, yeah, we would send law enforcement in to stop the operation. If it does eventually become an authority type of issue, absolutely. And there are steps we can take, and they would be taken with trained professionals with arms.
So Ron, that the leverage that you asked, Pat, so let's say you get 2-3 violations for noise. If you wanted to fight that as the renter, what's the chances that would stand against suspending your license so you couldn't do it? Or do they just, because I have a tough time believing that a couple noise violations could totally suspend and they could pull it away, and that person wouldn't go back in court and fight against you.
Well, we may issue a citation against a renter, but that's not where our leverage will be. Renters come and go. They may rent here and be gone, never come back.
He means the property.
Yeah, the property, like
Okay.
if you suspended operation of it,
Okay.
does that stand quite often?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess ultimately do you all believe that people can just thumb their nose at ordinances and ignore us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really? Where we actually take action? No, I'm
That's
not
what's
saying,
happening.
I'm not.
That is what's happening now because we don't do enforcement. We don't even
That's
have
a different question.
We don't even
If we
have.
don't take action, I
Right.
get it. But if we take action, if we go to court, we get a court order, we show the court order to the sheriff's department, there will be enforcement. The question is up to us, are we going to take those steps? But people don't just thumb their nose at court orders and deputies standing at their doorstep. We have to get to that point. If we get to that point, it will be enforced.
Chances of the magistrate or whoever going forward and accepting the suspension, though, is that
Actually, I've written an ordinance where we handle the suspension. It can be challenged in court. But it's our license. We could take the first shot at suspending a license. We issue it in the first place.
And
Thanks, Ron.
without getting into the nitty gritty, but are there workable mechanisms for determining noise? Has someone gone down, as a township or a municipality, gone down that route and actually come up with a good way of determining a noise violation?
When we have a definitive way to determine a noise violation, I'm going to retire. Noise is a tough issue. We all know that. That's a very tough issue. It's not just tough for STRs. It's tough for pickleball courts, motorcycles, guys working on their, people living on the lake, and the boats go by and they're 200, 300 feet out in the lake and they're really loud. They can be half a mile out in the lake and be really loud. Noise is a problem. We can make a good faith effort at trying to put some or language in an ordinance, and chances are, against a really egregious situation, it could be enforced. There will be a lot of gray area where it's going to be tough. But
There's quiet time, like I mean, I've been into a lot of places where they say no noise after, no outside disturbances after 10. Are those more enforceable? Easier to enforce?
Absolutely, I think it is easier to enforce something when we say, there are times of the day when we're tougher on noise. So, yes, I think distinguishing time of day is something we should do.
I want to point out something that the guy in the black shirt, I forget his name.
Jake,
He brought up a really good point earlier, that he never had a problem with short-term rentals until one of them. And I'd like to point out that there is a lot of good ones out there. Like we've heard from everybody, that's come in here. Some of them have them and they still think that there should be something done. My question would be, what is the difference between the ones that didn't bother you versus the one that bothers you now? And how do we get to that point where we can solve the problem without having to enforce it? Because we're setting the precedents beforehand. We're changing it so that those short-term rentals that are an issue, we can do something about it so that it doesn't become an issue going down the road. And so coming up with that kind of plan, whether it is a, noise time, or coming up with, you can only have this many cars on your lot, and sticking to occupancy. Are those the issues that make the two STRs different? Is that what it is? That's something that we need to look at, is why are some not problem and some are? And they're big problems. Right. So that's what we have to look at. I mean, they're saying this, the size of the unit, and that does become a problem because now all of a sudden, so we have to determine, well, just because the place is really big, are we allowing too many on it? So those are things that I think we really need to really pay attention to. We're worried about the noise, and I get the noise, and everybody keeps talking about.
the public comment part has closed.
We keep
Please
talking about the
prepare.
noise. And like what Ron said, that's so hard to try to do something about, because even if my neighbors, which own their house, are making a lot of noise, there's nothing I can do about it. Noise is a hard one to deal with. But if we can somehow figure out how to decrease the odds of that noise being an issue, we get rid of some of that problem, because like it has been said, there is a lot of them out there that are not bad and they're not an issue. So I don't want to take it out on the ones that are following the rules and doing things the right way, and they don't have an issue, and making them pay more and putting them through the ringer when they didn't do anything. And it's a, large handful, I don't know how many it is exactly, that are the big issue. We need to, figure out those, because we know that there's a, we don't have a cop here. We don't have, law enforcement of any sort. Is there a way that we can eliminate some of the problems before we need them? Is where I'm getting with this.
The sense I got from one of the meetings from responsible owners is that they were prepared and they understood the need for enforcement and perhaps new rules. They were all, I can't speak for them, but it seemed like they were all for it and were in support of regulation. The ones who you never hear about already follow those rules and aren't afraid of an additional, as long as, assuming that it doesn't impact their operation. The fee issue, that's definitely something that might cause some of them pause. But the discussions I've had with individuals, and this could be a very narrow group, but the discussion I've had with some of the individuals is that some of them make a lot of money, and an increase in fees they don't want to be tarred with the same brush. So they're willing to pay an increased fee to allow their operation to continue. Is some of the things I've heard, some of the things that have been told to me by residents. So I hear you.
have a question in general. I read through all these letters and emails that Michelle had provided us in these binders. And all throughout the day, I was wondering who was the guy I was wondering who the neighbor was on Maple Lane that was suffering through. And Jake, you answered my question. My other question is related to members here. Is this person licensed?
Yes.
Then does our existing ordinance have an enforcement mechanism?
It does not.
Well, why in the heck do we have it on the books if it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism?
What does that?
You know what I mean?
It does have an enforcement
It should
mechanism.
have some
Certainly it
type
does.
of control, because we know in a sense that one of the other comments that I read is that, there's an easy way to resolve this problem. There's 100 people that have the license, and there are 100 people that are ignoring the license. You could solve half the problem by saying to 100 people, you don't get a license because you didn't follow the rules. That's an interesting way of taking this problem and resolving some of it. But really, the crux of the whole thing is, no matter what we do, enforcement has to be on the forefront. And we have to stick to it, or quite frankly, we might as well throw the darn thing away. I personally believe that we should regulate STRs. We need to beef it up. But before we do that, I think we have to ask that question: are we willing to enforce? That's a board decision, not a planning commission decision. We can write anything you want, but when it comes down to brass tacks, are you going to budget for an enforcement officer, a person, and enforce the rule? Because once someone finds out, and I know this from firsthand being an administrator, once people know that that rule is being enforced, the word gets out faster than fire. So
does the lack of enforcement.
exactly. And but
So for example, when I say there's no real enforcement in our current STR, there's virtually no rules in our ordinances about conduct or at the short-term. Whole ordinance is designed to protect the safety of an occupant. If we wanted to make a noise complaint, we have to do it under the general noise ordinance.
And,
There's
you know,
nothing specific to short-term rentals. So that's why I say there's no real enforcement. When I first started being manager, before I turned that over to Stephanie, I looked for a citation book. Like, where do I write tickets? We didn't have them anymore because we ran out in 2004 and we never ordered any more. Right? We don't have an officer here who can walk out and serve a citation. So that's why enforcement is tough. If I agree with what Jay just said, which is the Board of Trustees has to address the funding of an enforcement mechanism. To me, the number one priority we have, not just for short-term rentals, but for the zoning ordinances, for no parking ordinances, for speeding, is we don't have any real police presence here. And we really need to look at how that might be funded. But we could have the best short-term rental ordinance in the country, and if nobody enforces it, it's pretty worthless.
absolutely. And if we're relying upon the noise ordinance doing it, I concur with Ron. The noise ordinance, and I've dealt with many in my career, to the point where we had decibel reading devices and people that were trained on them. For crying out loud, it's sort of like trying to define obscenity, if you will, or something like that. I know it when I see it, or in this case, I know it when I hear it. I think it's just one of several factors that we need to use in the ordinance. to regulate short-term rentals. And these bad players, we need to enforce that as quickly as possible, because I feel really bad for Mr. Vanderploeg here, you know, for crying out loud. That neighborhood is a very nice looking neighborhood from the street. I'm surprised there hasn't been any, well, sound words or violence or acts of that nature that have taken place because of people just being frustrated that no one's helping them.
Well,
And yet there are good actors that I've seen and heard in other areas of the township, and I'm very sympathetic to the old STRs that are along the lake shore that have been well handled and well managed, but it's the ones that are the outliers, if you will, that are causing this problem. But that's why ordinances generally get adopted, is these outliers causing the problem for everyone else.
some of the neighbors are taking matters into their own hands.
It's scary too.
Steve, I got a question for you. Of these 100 units that we're talking about, 100 licensed, 100 unlicensed, do we have any idea of what districts they sit in? R1, R2, R3, what the scatter that is?
They're scattered all over the place. If we take a little pause, I'll go print out a picture where we plotted them all out on a map, and I will hang that map out. These are the licensed ones, right?
Okay.
So what you'll see is clusters of them west of 66th Street. So Macataw, Castle Park. You have a cluster around Goshorn Lake, but it's smaller. They're scattered. I can tell you from getting the complaints is that if you're in R1.5 or R2, the likelihood that we're going to get a complaint from adjoining neighbors is huge. If you're in R1 ag multi-use, the likelihood we're going to get a complaint is almost zero. If somebody runs it as a weekly rental, as opposed to a weekend rental, the complaints go way, way down.
Interesting.
Right? Minimum 1 week rental versus some people rent them out just for Friday and Saturday. The Friday and Saturday tends to be a party. An event. One of the things that's really missing in our current ordinance is we have a capacity for sleeping, but we don't limit how many people could be on the property. So not only Maple, but other properties have had real issues with somebody renting the house and then inviting their closest 120 friends. And that all show up and they all have to park someplace. And on Maple, it's a cul-de-sac, it's a dead end. It just gets packed. And then you add a food truck, things like that. It's nuts. So I think there are ways to regulate short-term rentals that will avoid a lot more of these problems. My own sense is that we never should have allowed them in R1.5 and R2. And they probably should have always been a special use everywhere. You have any thoughts, Chad?
Lots. You know, I think it comes down to taking a strong look at the ordinances, looking at a lot of the things that have been brought up here, and trying to both preventatively set it up so that it if we do allow them and you know, the number, the occupants, how many are on the property, parking, all of those things need to be incorporated into it. And then I think from the enforcement standpoint, you know, there were several comments made at the last meeting about, you know, trying to get the program to stand on its own. And I think we can try to do that to the best you know, as well as possible, but it's, the program's not going to fund a full-time police enforcement here either. I don't see, the math doesn't seem to make sense in my mind. So I think that's a broader board level discussion, but I do think that if we're spending a lot of time, we've heard a lot of the communities engaged in this topic. I think we all go and take a, you know, to present as a planning commission, presenting what we've heard here today over the last several sessions to the board of what we think it would be. And then we need to figure out how to get teeth into it so we can enforce it.
Stephanie or supervisor, has research been done into how much a part-time or a response sheriff would cost, A? And B, have we researched how much those companies that now will ferret out, will do the research, it was discussed at the previous meeting, who will ferret out the unlicensed. Have we at least started to explore what those costs might be or could be?
So I looked at hiring a company to use your words, ferret out,
Fire.
no, to search out and find the unlicensed rentals. And it was prohibitively expensive. You're
Seriously,
talking thousands of dollars.
hundreds of thousands?
Thousands of dollars per month. So we are less than 6 miles by 6 miles. We have access to the technology. I think we can do it.
House?
Yeah, I think we need to do it in-house.
They are expensive, and besides that, they don't enforce anything.
They don't
just-
enforce-
They just
they-
tell you where the violations
Document.
are. They don't do anything.
So we did check out. It's about $45 an hour. If you could find somebody who has a badge and is willing to enforcement officer on a part-time basis. I have asked everybody who's been identified to me, there's a officer in Manlius who does it part-time, no interest in Laketown. Park Township, no interest in Laketown. Port Sheldon, no interest in doing it in Laketown as well. I don't know if I smell bad or what.
Could be travel.
Could be travel time. But we haven't identified a part-time resource. I asked Sheriff Baker and Sergeant Haas at the Allegheny County Sheriff's Department to identify somebody who might do that, and they were unable to do so. For a full-time officer, current price is about somewhere between 145 and 150,000 a year. And that basically does pay for the officer on a full-time basis. The Sheriff's Department provides all the equipment, meaning the patrol car, weapons, uniforms, everything else.
We afford to pay a part-time more if the fee was directed towards the person with the problem.
Good point.
Didn't understand.
If, like, could we afford to, could we get a part-time if we weren't paying for it? The
Spot enforcement?
Mhm.
So-
if he got called to enforce something and it was a legit complaint, the person at that residence would pay for that.
So another.
They eat the cost of the
You could set up a fine structure that functionally does that.
We want to steer clear of bounty hunters.
Yes.
Oh,
That could be dangerously close. We'd want to be very, very careful with that.
Right.
I think
what I hear him saying though is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we up the fee structure and we get a pot of money of 50K, say, from the licenses, and then there are the 2 or 3 bad apples that we know we need an enforcement action about. Is it a soldier of fortune situation to pay to do that enforcement? Or is that selective enforcement?
We can charge license fees and charge ordinance violation fees to certainly cover our costs. If we start turning it into a money-making venture and using that money to cover other costs, we're going to have a problem. So there's a lot we can do, but but we're not unlimited in our discretion.
But what I think he's asking is, can we use that money to then contract on a case-by-case basis for an enforcement action?
understand, if we go to court, the courts will set the fees and the courts collect the money and they disperse it according to their schedule. So, you know, we have some control, we have some input, but we can't just, when people come in and plead at our Civil Infractions Bureau, that's fine. We handle that money. But when they don't, when they contest us and they go to court, then it's a different issue.
I think you misunderstood. I'm asking if we can use the pot of money that we get from licensing fees to pay for a sheriff to go to the house and say, you are in violation.
Okay, yeah, absolutely, yes, the licensing fees, we can use licensing fees, but we can't, we have to justify the amount of license fee by the cost of the program and by what we spend the money on. We can't just, so we can certainly increase our licensing fees significantly.
Theoretically, to the point of covering his 140K estimate.
I don't know that.
I mean, theoretically.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so. I think part of it is, I think if we're going to do enforcement, we can't just do enforcement of the short-term rental ordinance.
it's everything.
We should do enforcement. There are a lot of ordinances that we have that we haven't been enforcing.
I don't get why we're looking at adding 140K. I think everyone here in the master plan, we know we want to keep this place rural. I think there is something to say about that Mike addressed: noise, occupancy, privacy. These are all things we enjoy. We make the sandbox to play within the rules. So on district regulations of R1, R2, R3, there's a factor of distance of rental units that plays into these factors that we all care about that I think we're not discussing. We're talking about enforcement on the back end. Once these places are rental places, we can't go back. I think we gotta fit that in the conversation on distance from other rental units within R2, R3.
We just have to be prepared to handle the people who don't comply. Because we can have great rules, but if people don't comply, if we never write a citation,
They won't get granted a license. I mean, we only have per se 100 licensed people or residences right now.
But we have almost the same amount unlicensed.
Right, but they're not licensed, and when that goes into place on distance in R1, R2, and R3, that would stand over.
so how do we shut down the 100 unlicensed places? Who's going to do that?
So that's the basis of my question is how do we pay someone? What are the mechanisms to pay someone with a badge to go knock on the door of the unlicensed?
You're not gonna get anyone with a badge to go there. You know how what the priority of the sheriff's department would be on that unless we have our own officer.
But that was my question to Ron, is that if you pay someone, if you set up a contract for them to off-duty become our enforcement mechanism, is that legal? Is it done? Is it?
That's kind of what I was getting at, is it the part-time guys that you talk to or whatever that were charging $45 an hour? Well, do we need to pay them more? And
When we
and
have-
would they
when
be
we-
willing to do it if, I don't think we need full-time, but we need something. And that's where I'm just, if they're not interested in it just because it's $45 an hour, then what would make it
Worth their
interesting
while.
enough that we're not spending as much as a full-time, but we're still getting the job done? I don't know.
I agree with
I,
that.
I thought you said the 100 unlicensed were not grandfathered in, so that
How are you going to close them down, Mark?
we would probably have to grant them, but how are we?
How are we
Uh,
going to
so-
close them down?
So how in the future are we gonna prevent more going in? There's no rules saying the density of rental units within a
I
district.
don't understand you.
There's no rules.
It can be any rule that we want.
Okay, and then that's why I'm saying is I suggest we need to look into that and enact something.
I think that's what everybody on this
Yeah.
board thinks.
Good.
Everybody thinks that. But what we went to was the fundamental issue is why would you bother spending 5 minutes on this subject if at the end you aren't going to enforce it?
Agree.
right? So we were trying to talk through different ways to pay for enforcement. The discussion we're gonna have on the details and the nitty-gritty of what our ordinances should say, those are gonna be really detailed, long discussions.
For sure.
I think the one
As-
question
as-
that you've been avoiding or the thought is, and I'll just say it, and maybe you, I'm sure you have, Steve, you're a very smart man. The issue is.
Kiss
quite
my
fr-
ass.
Well, the obvious is that, what we need is a code enforcement type officer. And the board of trustees needs to decide to budget that. And if there's not enough money for that, well, there so happens to be an opportunity to go for a small millage out there. And I know that that's a bad word, but if you tell the people that this money is going to be used for enforcement of the township regulations and give them the reasons for that issue, they might pass it. It's worth the try, because I don't think, because if you suspect that the aspect of them, the fines covering the cost of an officer, well, that's going to be in your ears. I mean, there's going to be several months before that is going to be able to pay off. So you're either going to have to adjust the budget to cover the cost of this code enforcement officer, because we know that there are zoning issues that even Michelle can't keep up with, let alone do good plan, doing a great job at that. But the fact of it is how many Michelles are there to do all these jobs? And you know of other problems, Stephanie's probably learning about them, that need to be resolved. So it seems to me that no matter what ordinance we have in our code book, there's an enforcement issue, and we're just bringing one of them to light with this discussion on short-term rentals. So we need to buck up and realize that a code enforcement officer is there, and perhaps no one likes to pay more taxes, but I can tell you, everyone in my neighborhood, if they would say, is going to be used for enforcement, to make sure that my property is protected, I'm sure many of them would say, sign me up. And I think that a lot of other areas in the community would say the same thing.
Yes, I'm looking at it a bit differently, and I think there's significant opportunity through building a fee structure to help fund enforcement. And, if there's 200 short-term rentals in the township now, there are
100 licenses.
another 100 that aren't. We got to get the 100 that aren't. We got to figure that out, right? We got to get them licensed, or they got to go
No,
away.
they gotta go away.
If it was $1,000 a year, before anybody freaks out, those that have a 2-bedroom, I'm not saying it's for every short-term rental, because some are not a problem. We've already talked through that. But what I'd like to have the planning commission do is put some time fee idea. And maybe it's these mega short-term rentals that are in the township that have 16 people staying, that have these big parties on the weekends, whatever. Maybe they pay a much higher fee than the guy that has a 2-bedroom little cottage that he's doing. I don't know, but maybe there's something there. But fees could help generate a lot of money that could help pay for enforcement. And I don't think we need an enforcement person 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I think an enforcement person maybe Thursday through Sunday might work. I mean, we might have to try different things, but I doubt that we have a lot of problems with short-term rentals on Mondays and Tuesdays, let's say. I'd love to know if we have any. I'm guessing we don't have any. But I think that the fee part could really help pay, and we wouldn't have to raise taxes. And it could help pay for, and maybe we could find a retired sheriff. We have a retired sheriff now that does stuff for the township, does auto inspection forever. But maybe there's somebody like that. Maybe they don't have to have an active badge, but there's somebody that can have a somewhat official looking uniform, that when we get a call from a neighbor that there's a big party or there's all kinds of problems, that this person can go there with a clipboard and some sort of a uniform looking thing, and at least make note of it, talk to the people, tell them you're in violation, the owner's gonna get a a fine, they're gonna get a letter, they're gonna get a warning, whatever. But this is all doable in my mind.
We're gonna get you a badge and a uniform, Jim.
And it's not gonna be,
Steve and Ron, is money we collect from fees, just the licensing fees, is that restricted money? Is that,
Can be used for the enforcement of the STR rules, licensing fees for STRs. Mhm.
Anybody else on the board? So I thank everybody for coming tonight and for all the other nights. I think this is an important discussion for every community to have. And we're late to the party. That's Laketown Township. We started these discussions a little late. When this short-term rental ordinance was adopted by the township board, it was actually March of 2020. And people were probably not really thinking that much about short-term rentals because the pandemic had just started. And that's when this got passed. It's been 5 years. I think it's well past the time we should have taken a look at it. So I'm glad this group has come together. I do think that the first step is with the planning commission. The first thing I'd like to hear from is whether the planning commission recommends that we extend the moratorium. I hope you take that up at your meeting immediately after this meeting. And then I think the 5 of you on the planning commission need to start socializing, what approach. There's clearly a lot of different approaches. There's the wild, wild west approach. There's the kind of Saugatuck approach. Let's pick some winners and losers and have it really defined by the district. I'm talking about Saugatuck City. And depending on what district you're in, there can be X number of short-term rentals. My own take is if you have one short-term rental in a neighborhood, you've just changed the whole neighborhood. Many areas where it's really tight in our township, one is too many. There are other areas in our township where no one would even notice. It's also clear to me that in Laketown and Castle Park, where we've had short-term rentals the longest, there are associations that are enforcing some pretty tough rules about short-term rentals. And there are groups there that do the enforcement, which is why we rarely get a complaint from those areas. Anyway, the internet has changed short-term rentals. We used to call them boarding houses. They used to be really clearly defined in the law as transients. They had no rights. But the internet now has changed it that, we have people who rent to other people they've never met because it's all handled online. Back in the 1930s, you would meet face to face with your renter. I mean, it was the only way you knew you were going to be able to collect because nobody was going to give you a credit card because they didn't exist. Anyway, does the planning commission, do the members, do you feel like you have a clear enough sense of the task that has been given to you?
I have a couple of comments. So I do think the task is clear. If we're going to look at the ordinances and take the information that was presented here at the Joint Commission, and just the intent of the Joint Commission is we all heard the same information so that we could, deliberate, think about it, question. I think one thing I don't know what this process looks like or what we can and can't do, so I might need some input from you, Steve and Ron, is so that it doesn't bounce back and forth between the planning commission and the board. Is there a way to get, everybody has their takeaways. We've all taken away notes of, what you feel might or should be enacted. Is there some sort of document that comes out of this or correspondence maybe notes from each of the members that are here so that we can consider those as we deliberate and update the zoning ordinance? Putting it on everybody, because what I don't want to do is go.
Question is whether we can all, within the boundaries of the Open Meetings Act.
Correct.
Chad's asked whether each of us could individually write down our thoughts about approaches to the problem going forward, that those can be shared with everybody else, so we see where we're on the same page.
And if that's inappropriate, Ron, I understand. I just don't want to.
Thinking there's a way to do it that it's not inappropriate.
Yeah,
Which
no,
one?
I think that, I mean, we have the same right to write, we have the same right and ability, legal ability to write letters as the public does. We can do that. We can share them. The problem isn't the original letter that goes from a board member or PC member to another. The problem is when then there are responses and deliberations begin, and it happens on a computer.
Yep.
And then there's an electronic discussion. The
Yep.
initial letter is fine. So if everyone would write down, say, 2 or 3 or whatever, specific goals, objectives, things you'd like to make sure are addressed in a zoning ordinance amendment and in a regulatory ordinance,
Yep.
those would be fine. Those would be subject to Freedom of Information Act request.
Yep.
They could be received from every board and PC member and used by the planning commission in a public meeting to discuss and reach some conclusions.
Just don't write down, don't respond.
Yep.
Don't
Just
talk about
The
don't-
response will be in our planning commission meeting when the planning commission says, this is what
And I'm
board
not,
member, PC member says, and what do we think about this?
I'm not asking for dialogue outside of the meetings. I just want to make sure I understand as we're conducting as a planning commission, individual board priorities and planning commissioner priorities so that we don't bounce back and forth between the two entities and kind of, we present something that we feel that as a planning commission we agree with and that has a chance of gaining board approval. You may
Good.
disagree when you get it, but the intent would be there.
Good. Anything else for tonight?
You mentioned a map that you had.
Yes.
It's a great idea.
So Zoe did it for me. When we conclude, I will
Okay.
go get it printed and
And the
bring a bunch of copies.
chart that
That will
indicates,
be coming out hopefully by the end of the day on Friday. Which maps out all the different, it's harder than you think.
Oh, I've done it.
It maps out all the different ordinances all along the lake shore and different approaches.
Crazy.
A lot of different approaches to it.
So Steve, just one follow-up. The board had initially set the moratorium.
We're
So
looking for a
you're looking for
recommendation.
recommendation. Okay.
So I think this board, as a joint board, has concluded its mission. I would entertain a motion to dissolve this board.
I'll make that motion. We dissolve this special short.
I will second.
Motion by Treasurer Johnson, second by Chairman, what's your last name again?
Be nice.
Nienhuis. Chairman Nienhuis. To dissolve the joint committee of the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission. Any discussions, any thoughts, Stephanie? Michelle?
This is a little off topic, but I want to thank Zoe, who was orchestrated all your communications and that nice binder and put in a lot of hours making sure that folks got information. So
Let her know that the entire joint committee thanks Zoe Hallam, who happens to be attending the meeting. Good for Zoe and Phil. Any discussion of the pending motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
nay. Oh, sorry. Reflex.
Can't say both.
All right, this committee is dissolved and we are adjourned.
So we will
If you
do,
would- yeah,
we
go
will
ahead.
start the planning commission after a short recess at 7:30.
We did it already.
You had it twice on the agenda, that's why.
Yeah, but it,
The way
we,
to do fees for